Good morning on this wonderful Wednesday, June the 13th. We are halfway through the Bible. Golly, this year has just flown by. I can't believe it's already the middle of June. But we're reading about King Solomon in the book of Kings. We're chapters 11 and 12 today. So, yesterday we talked about the fact that God spoke directly to Solomon. So he didn't need a priest or a prophet. I think he had priests and prophets assigned to him. But he actually heard from God himself. God had been very specific with Solomon about what he wanted him to do, how he built the temple. I mean, we got to read about the specifics of that temple. God cares about every little nail, every little tassel, the colors. There's no detail that's not important to God. So with Solomon being the wisest man that had ever been born at this time, and today in 2018 is still the wisest man to have ever been born, I have to believe that Solomon knew the way. And God had warned him, had told him not to marry foreign women. And he told him why. He told him that it would cause him to worship their idols, that they would cause him to worship their idols. And so here we have a man who had the most wisdom of anybody on the face of the earth, and that led to prosperity. He was the richest man that has ever walked the earth or ever will walk the earth. Because of his wisdom, the decisions he made, the money and the prosperity just flowed to him. He was lacking for nothing, and yet his lustful thoughts for women is what he started feeding, and we get to see that he turned away from God. And it's so sad. Such a talent, such wisdom, such a man of God, to be granted the gift of building the physical temple, something David longed to do, was given to Solomon, and he took it for granted. He just took it for granted. Doesn't mean God didn't bless him, doesn't mean that there weren't periods of time when he sought God. But the other thing that, as I was reading about Solomon, because God's really dealing with me about not hesitating in my faith, as Solomon ran the kingdom day by day, in the beginning, I didn't know I was going to talk about this today, but in the beginning of Solomon's reign, remember, David laid the groundwork for him to kill Joab, because Joab had betrayed David and he betrayed the kingdom. And then he had to get rid of this one and this one because their loyalties. And so the very first acts that Solomon did was a cleansing of his royalty, his royal staff, so that they could start with a clean slate and move forward according to God's principles and laws. And then we saw that Solomon prayed for wisdom. And then what we saw from that point until today, in today's reading, a period of time when Solomon walked with God, and he walked in the wisdom that God had given him, and he didn't hesitate. When it was time to redo that city, he rebuilt that city. When it was time to destroy that town, he destroyed that town. When it was time to build this building, when it was time to build these grain silos to hold the grain, he did it. No hesitation. He's dealing with me about the faith he's given me. The Bible says he pre-measured the faith he gave each one of us. So that means I've got the perfect measurement of faith living on the inside of me. I turn that faith on by redirecting back Christ-centered, not focusing outward, not focusing on my flesh. I focus on Christ. My faith is activated. I move forward in faith, and then I hesitate. It's, oh, did I miss you, God? I mean, that's the key phrase that God keeps bringing to my mind, is how many times it's, did I miss you with this, God? Because even if I miss, he's still God. So all this time, there's no hesitation. Solomon fulfills the call. He had 20 years. It took him 20 years to build the temple and his royal palace. No hesitation. Do it, do it, do it. If he had hesitated, it could have taken 40 years. And then what would have happened in the 20 years? I mean, what do we miss when we hesitate? That's really not what my message today is about. So here we are, 20 years of no hesitation, 20 years of more than enough wisdom, 20 years of more than enough provision. I know this is speaking to somebody. 20 years of more than enough, and bam, I take my eyes, and all I do is I move my eyes off the narrow road. All Solomon did, he's on God's narrow road, but he looked over and he saw the women, and he desired the women. And then it leads to today's reading. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from all these tribes, and the Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel. See, not just Solomon. He instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them. See, Solomon heard, don't marry them, and he looked. And the result is, yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord. When we make it about our spouse, it's not about God. When we make it about men, it's not about God. When we make it about women, it's not about God. When we make it about our children, it's not about God. When we make it about our career, my independence, I'm not going to be dependent on a man. I'm going to make my own way. As a man, nobody's going to tell me what to do. They're not going to disrespect me. I won't work there if they disrespect me. It's not about God. You know what? They disrespect you in the workplace. You know what your first line of action is? Oh, Lord, I know you heard what they said. I know you know that was disrespect. I believe my knowledge of that comes from you. Lord, what would you have me to do with that? And most of the time he's going to say nothing because I got it. Most of the rarely does he have us defend ourselves. Now, he does not have us lay down and become a doormat and allow abuse to happen. He does not have us not have any boundaries. Just the opposite. Just the opposite. Boundaries are clear in God's kingdom. You're not going to invade my boundaries because I'm a child of God. How dare you touch a child of God? How dare you invade my boundaries? It's just the opposite. But see, we seek him first. Seek ye first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. He stopped seeking God. God had already spoken. He had already told him, do not marry them. And he said, I'm going to do what I want to do. It feels good. I got to have her. I got it. I mean, 700 times somebody else's royalty he had to have, and then 300 times concubines. That's 1,000 wives. Whew. Wow. And then verse 9, the Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. In a time when God never appeared to people, he had appeared to Solomon twice, and he angered him. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So he tells him in verse 12, God does. Well, I'm just going to continue reading. The Lord said to him, since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. And then this is the point that God points out to me. Then he says, over and over and over again, God says this, but for the sake of your father David, on down just in the next verse, for the sake of my servant David, and all the way through, for the sake of David, because of David's heart, for the sake of David, he preserved the lineage of the kingdom leading to Jesus Christ to be under David in spite of Solomon. See, I can mess up and I can miss, but God's will be done. God's will be done. The neat part is because we have Jesus Christ, the Messiah has come and has fulfilled all scriptures. Even when I miss, it's no longer in spite of, but it's along with. I still get to be a part. He doesn't cast me to the side because I fail and tell me that I'm worthless. He doesn't even get angry at me the way he gets angry at Solomon because of Jesus Christ. Not because of anything I've done. I've done way worse than Solomon. But because of Jesus Christ, we don't get to, don't have to suffer the consequences. But starting about verse 14, then God raises up the opposition to Solomon for his idol worshiping. And we get to read today about how God then raises up the armies against him. The people, his own relatives, again, they come at him and he's being betrayed from all different, and people die. People died because of his disobedience. Wow. One of his own officials, it says in verse 26, rose up against him. And then God anoints Jeroboam to be the next king. God, just as he had done with David when Saul was the king, God told Jeroboam, you will be the king. And so Solomon even tries to kill him. God's anointed one. What his father refused to do to Saul, David refused to kill Saul, even when he was laying at his feet asleep. He refused to kill him. And Solomon rises up. That's how far off from God Solomon got. That he rose up and tried to kill God's anointed one, Jeroboam. But Jeroboam hid and stayed hidden until Solomon died. And then in verse 8, when Rehoboam rises up and tries to become the king, he starts seeking advice. And in verse 8, it's, but Rehoboam rejected the advice of the older men. So Rehoboam is given the kingdom over 11 of the 12 tribes because Solomon maintained the one tribe for the sake of David, for the sake of his father. God allowed him to remain king. Jeroboam is the one that will replace him. Rehoboam raises up as king of the other tribes, and he's new. You know, we can see ourselves in a new position, and where I'm a new mother, I'm a new father, I have a new job, I have a new ministry, I'm new at things, and so he pulls in people for advice, and the people he pulls in, to me, are the most logical. So I start out in a brand new industry with a new mission in a new industry that I know nothing about. Where am I going to learn it from? First of all, pray. Ask God. But he's going to tell you to call on the advice of others. Who's successful? And this is what's so important about who we listen to. Who is our chosen ones that we listen to? Because there'll be people all around you, and everybody has an opinion. Everybody. I have an opinion, and my opinion in a quarter won't even buy you a cup of coffee today. Everybody has an opinion. But there is a divine order of things that God places your network of people around you he wants you to have. And here's the deal. What will that look like? Will he send you those that can't pay their bills? Will he send you those who default on their debts? Will he send you those that gets kicked out of the churches? Will he send you those that has a string of failed relationships in their? Will he send you those that have failed in every endeavor? Is that who God sends as your network? You need to, when it comes time, who, Lord, is my network? Who's my core people that you've given me? Rehoboam started out doing exactly what he needed to do. He called the advisors from Solomon in and says, what do I do? And they gave him advice. And they had just been 40 years with the most successful king that had ever walked the face of the earth. That right there is our first indication. Instead, they called in the younger ones that had no experience, no proven track record whatsoever, and he took their advice, and then they failed. So you see what I'm saying? Who's your chosen ones? Ask God. And then one of the ways when you ask God, he'll have you look and say, oh, they model a life like I want. They have what I'm longing for. Their life and walk with the Lord is one like I want. instead of this one that, I'm not going around them today because there's trouble. I'm not. You see what I'm saying? Be careful who you take advice from. 2018, I wrote in the column here, Rehoboam rejected advice from successful people. And then he paid the consequences. So, a lot to be learned through these. When I very first started reading this one-year Bible, and I struggled through all of the Old Testament, believe it or not, the Kings was the only chapters that first year I got anything out of. I was a fairly high up official in the Postal Service, and I had a lot of people that I was responsible for. And I took that job seriously, and I was asking God's help, and I got a lot of leadership principles out of the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. There's a lot of things in here that we can model ourselves after when God speaks, because God doesn't change. Truth is truth with God. Then it goes into the Acts. And this is a powerful, powerful story. This is where Saul is transformed. The old man is Saul, persecuting Christians. His mind was wired and mapped that these people are wrong. He had been raised with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He's one or the other, and I don't know which, so don't. Anyway, he was raised under the law. He was a scholar of the law. He was one of the best in the land. He knew the law, and he was fiercely defending the law, even unto his death. He would have died for his beliefs in the law. And then here's these Christians out there that believing in Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and so he's doing what the law would say. You blaspheme what the law says and you die. And so he's killing Christians. His brain has been from birth. Since before birth, his brain had been mapped and wired to come up against any kind of blasphemy, any kind of anti-God, anti-law sentiments. And so I don't know, I could have looked it up, how old Paul was, but he had years and years and years and years of training, of exposure, of modeling that kind of behavior. And in fact, he's on his way to Damascus. And as he was approaching Damascus in verse 3, Acts 9:3, on this mission that he was on, a light from heaven suddenly shone down around him. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul asked, who are you, Lord? And the voice replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Now, right there, why didn't Jesus just snap his fingers and rewire his brain and have him just go out and change all the world? Because it doesn't work that way. That God doesn't work that way. He had Saul, who become Paul because of this experience, take his time and seek God, and it had to be real. And so transformation is a process. Rarely does God ever just wave his magic wand and you're just totally and completely delivered. You'll be delivered of parts and portions. You hear of miraculous deliverance from drugs, miraculous deliverance from sex addictions, miraculous deliverance from all kinds of things, abuse, all kinds of stuff. But I have never heard of a miraculous deliverance where we went from wallowing in our sin to we never ever sin again and never ever have a problem, never ever have a moral mindset, never ever think wrong, never ever. It's a process, it's a journey. It's a journey from this point, at the point that we recognize who God is and that he's in us, and we ask him to be Lord of our life. It's a process, and we even see the process here in this amazing transformation of Saul. Get up and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do. The men with Saul stood speechless, for they heard the sound of someone's voice, but they saw no one. Saul picked himself up off the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he was blind. And I felt like I got brand new revelation about that. Why did he have to be blind? Because this was an accelerated deliverance for Saul. And so in order for him to catch up and fulfill the mission that God had put inside of him for the rest of his life, God needed things to happen quickly. He instantly made him blind to the old way of seeing. And in that moment, when he was struck blind and couldn't see anything, a remapping and a rewiring of his brain had to take place. And God used that blindness then, that when his eyes were opened, his spiritual eyes were opened, and he saw things the way God wanted him to see him instead of the way he always would have seen him. If he had just continued on, he would have had those old mindsets, those old strongholds, those old issues, or whatever you want to call them, that he would have had to continue to be delivered of. And there was some miraculous deliverance that took place through the blindness and then the opening of his eyes. That's so powerful. While we are being transformed, it's best to be silent. So the people that was with him was speechless. They couldn't even speak. Now, why would God do that? Just ask me how many times I've messed up what God's trying to do in somebody's life because I opened my big mouth. My greatest gift can be my greatest thorn in my side at times. So anyway, I took way longer on this than I thought I was going to, but we get to see this transformation of Saul in today's reading, Acts chapter 9, and we can see ourselves in that transfiguration if we look with spiritual eyes. So I pray today that as you read today's reading, that's exactly what you did, is you watched and you read and you heard spiritually and not just with physical eyes. So thank you for joining me today.